Well, folks, it's slightly after 11 o'clock, so why don't we begin? We have a few more people that will be coming in, and that's wonderful. I am Jim Barato. I'm a member of the United Church of Christ Musicians Association National Board, and my role on the board is education and enrichment for our members. And one of the common themes that we have been hearing about is music copyright and the church. And so, one of the things that I am very pleased to be hosting this seminar, and I have as our guest Siobhan McGuire, who is an assistant director at onelicense.net. And I know a number of us may be subscribing to that service. So I will let her introduce herself and tell a little bit more about the organization and her role and what she does there.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jim. So yes, my name is Siobhan McGuire. It's an unusual spelling, but it's just very easy to pronounce, Siobhan. And I've been at One License for about 3 years, a little better than 3 years. And before that, I made my living as a church musician here in the Chicago area. And then before that, in campus ministry when I was in college and in grad school. And then before that, I was a volunteer in my home church, being formed by people like all of us. Very grateful for the people who instilled in me a love of music and the ability to foster the singing and praying church, and then set me on a very rewarding career path. So now I'm at One License, and I'm familiar with One License because I managed One License and CCLI licenses for my churches over the years. So it's a rather natural progression for me. And I'm very happy to share what I can, what I know about copyright and about our One License service. Yes. So we like to say that at One License, we're at the crossroads of justice and education. So as church musicians, we all want to be doing the right thing, and we want to be able to compensate the people whose music we use to facilitate worship in our parishes. And so One License is standing with us there, wanting to do the right thing. And then composers and other artists and publishers are very anxious to put that music in your hands. They created it for the sole purpose of the church gathering congregationally and worshiping the Lord. So there we are, One License, standing with the musicians and the composers and other artists and the church musicians. And together we're seeking to do God's justice, right? So there's a lot to think about with copyright. We're always happy to think through those issues with you. And if we don't have the answer, we try to at least point you in the right direction. And I just want to mention that clearly I am not an attorney. I am a musician. So this isn't legal advice that I'm offering you. I'm offering you the best of my wisdom. Pardon me, trying to point you in the right direction if it's not something that One License can help you with. And Jim, if you like, I can jump in with some basics about copyright and some information about One License. Would that be all right?
Sure, that would be fine. Thank you.
Great. So let's just start off real basic and make sure we're all on the same page. Copyright is a form of property law. It's actually a form of intellectual property law. And I like to think that at a certain level, we all understand copyright. In fact, I'm going to guess you know more about copyright than you think you do. I often have conversations with people who are worried that they did the wrong thing or aren't sure they're looking at it the right way. And almost always they're on the right track, right? So copyright, it doesn't have to have explicitly a copyright claim on it, and a work that you create is protected under copyright law, whether or not you register it with the Copyright Office, whether or not you slap a copyright claim on it. You made it. It's copyright law is designed to protect what you made. So the copyright claim is generally found on commercially published scores and hymnals. It would be very unusual for a commercial publisher not to include a copyright claim on a copyrighted work. That would be highly unusual. And the copyright claim always has three elements: that copyright symbol, the C in a circle, and then the year, and then the name. And that name tells you who controls that copyrighted work. And the copyright claim is found in the hymnal, generally at the bottom of the hymnal page, although in some hymnals, the copyrights or some of the copyrights are indexed in the back. So if you don't see a copyright claim on the hymnal page, take a look in the back and see if there's an index of copyrights. And then on a musical score, it's found at the bottom of a title page. So sometimes that's confusing to folks. If you're looking at like a choral score, got the cover page, and then you open it up and the title page. So the title and the composer, maybe the arranger and the text author are up there at the top of the page. And then at the bottom of the page, you find the copyright claim. And then in a collection, say you've got a collection of piano solos. So there's going to be a copyright claim on the collection as a whole. The publisher has a copyright claim on the collection that they put together, the book, but each of the individual works can be copyrighted, and that copyright would not be affected by that copyright claim on the collection as a whole. So, out of the 25 piano solos in the collection published by ABC Music Company, perhaps 10 of those 25 are copyrighted by somebody else. And you would see the copyright claim at the bottom of the title page for the individual work in the collection. Sorry, I feel like I'm telling a Dr. Seuss story. But so each of the works might carry its own copyright claim, and that copyright claim may be independent of the publisher of the collection, right? So maybe the publisher has several of their own copyrighted works in that collection and several that belong to other folks. And the copyright claim on the individual work supersedes the copyright claim on the collection as a whole. It might be easier to think about that in a hymnal, right? So in the hymnal, you have some public domain works, you have some works copyrighted by the publisher of the hymnal, and then you have a bunch of other works that are copyrighted by other folks. And the copyright claim on the hymn is the one that governs, not the publisher's copyright claim on the hymnal, right? So that was kind of a lot of information, but kind of what I'm going to say about copyright. So maybe I'll pause and see if there are questions or concerns or comments about that.
We did have
I
one
also,
question
excellent.
that I wanted to know whether if it's on both the collection and the individual piece, do you
Right.
report both or just one?
Yeah, you report the copyrighted work that you used. So according to the copyright claim on that individual work, you report that work. You didn't use the collection, you used that work. So you report what you used. Okay. And then so interrupt me anytime. And also, I know I talk fast. I am trying to control that. So I will try not to talk fast. Churches operate, as you know, in a special way under copyright in one respect, right? So when you gather for worship, let's think pre-pandemic, right? Before we were all posting our worship services online. When you gather for worship on Sunday morning or Wednesday night or for the Tuesday afternoon staff meeting, when you gather for worship, you can use copyrighted music without seeking additional permissions, right? As long as you're singing from the commercially published score or from memory, you're not singing from like a song sheet or worship aid or something. As long as you're singing from the published hymnal or whatever, or playing, as long as the music is being made by y'all in person, you don't need permissions for that. So churches are exempt from using copyrighted music during worship, as long as other uses are not going on at that time, right? So just to sing or play copyrighted music during a worship service, you don't need permission. And that's the performance rights religious exemption, right? So if it's a concert, in a recital hall, that recital hall is managing performance rights. Churches are exempt from managing those performance rights, yeah? But then all other copyright uses you do need permission for. So you make a worship aid for your congregation or you project onto slides. That's congregational reprint, and the copyright holder is entitled to compensation for that in the form of royalties for that usage. If you're posting your worship video to the internet, all of the copyrighted music that can be heard in that video, you need permission from the copyright holder. Those, again, that's additional distributions, and the copyright holder is entitled to permission or to royalties to be compensated for that. So, and so I'm going to reach out to my friend Steve, who's a composer, and like, hey, we want to use your song this weekend. I noticed it's not published, so can I have your permission? And he says, sure. Or he says, sure, just send me $10, whatever. Okay, so the copyright holder isn't required to charge you for that, but they certainly are entitled to. Right.
So
Okay. Yeah.
we do have a question, Jane. I see that you have your hand raised. Jane, can you uh, type, or can you tell us what your question is?
I'm curious to know, and it involves this copying stuff. So you have the hymnal in front of you. We're getting even conflicting reports of that. Somewhere in the UCC and in the Lutheran churches, they say, oh, but if you have the hymnal, it's okay if you just destroy the copies at the end of the use. The other thing with that, related to that, would be if you want to, for example, you're in church, you're using the hymnal. If you then copy it in the bulletin, then you have to report it, correct?
Right. So let's back up a step. So purchase of the score or the hymnal gives you the rights to use it. It does not give you any other rights. So absent the express permission of the copyright holder for the work that you're considering copying, say you want to make a copy of a hymn and put it in the bulletin, you need that copyright holder's permission. Now, if your hymnal publisher, y'all are Pilgrim Press, is that right? UCCS? No, sorry. New Century Hymnal? No. In any case,
A
whatever
lot of
hymnal you're using, if that hymnal publisher says, hey, you bought our hymnal, you can, make congregational reprints as you need to for, your service. If they say that, they can only be speaking of their own copyrights. There are other works in the hymnal which they don't control. They don't hold that copyright, and they can't speak on that copyright holder's behalf. Okay, so I don't know that New Century said that, so that is not what I'm saying now. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. Okay,
Let me interrupt here.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
When I've been at the UCC church, and I'm a member of the UCC musicians, but what we were told, in addition to that, to what you're talking about, was if you go to the back of the hymnal, now this came from the UCC Musicians Association. If you go to the back of the hymnal on page, I think it was 808, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, it starts listing all the hymns. And rule of thumb was, if it wasn't listed, it was okay to use it and reprint it. So somebody, please, what's the story on that? Can we use it or not? I went ahead and I reported, even if it said, if the hymn was not printed, for example, Cum Ronda, God of grace and God of glory, nothing was there, so we were okay to reprint that and put it on the screen and stuff. Well, I went back and checked the actual copyright, and that wasn't so. It was not out of that particular arrangement was not out of the 75-year copyright range.
Okay, so Jane, I don't know what was said at that meeting, but I can tell you how copyright works, and then I can maybe say a word about how, like, you might want to proceed. So if you have the permission of the copyright holder, you can use it as the copyright holder gave you permission to use it. If it's under copyright and you don't have the copyright holder's permission to, for instance, reprint it, then you shouldn't do that, right? So remember, it's property law. My neighbor keeps the keys to his car on the front seat of his car. I'm not going to hop in his car and drive away without his permission. I absolutely could, but I'm not gonna, because I know it's not my car, right? So if the work is under copyright, get the copyright holder's permission before you reprint it, or, add it or use it in your worship video that you post online. You mentioned Qumranda. That hymn is in the public domain. I don't know about that text that you mentioned, but look for a copyright claim on the page. So I would go to the source. Okay, so yeah, there might be a list in the back, and they're like, oh, here's a thumbnail sketch for how I shorthand that. Myself, I'm going to look at the copyright claim, and then I know whether or not it's under copyright. Yeah. I'm sorry, I think you said something else. Forgot what. Okay. So then I have a license, or I have the copyright holder's permission. So I have a one license, and according to the license agreement, I can use works that I find in the database, and when I use them, I report them, and then my reports are put together with everybody else's reports, and royalties are calculated and distributed. So if you hear somewhere, oh, that's okay, you don't need to report that, fine. Somebody said you don't need to report it, but your license agreement says that you're going to report that, and it doesn't cost you anything to report it, and it is to the benefit of the copyright holder. So I would say, one, make sure you have permission to use it, and then two, do what you're supposed to do. Include the copyright notice when you reprint it, or put it in your worship video, and then report it. Yeah, those are the two agreements that you make, right? Does that sound good? Are there other questions out there?
Yes, we have one considering about the use of Zoom and how that, it's not, if you have the hymnal, but for example, with the pandemic, we didn't have access to the physical hymnals. Can you use provided that you didn't exceed the number of people on Zoom that you have physical hymnals for, can you use that material in the Zoom?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter about the physical hymnal. So the way the reprint license works is you can use anything in the one license database that's approved for congregational reprint, whether or not you have the hymnal, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not, we have 100 hymnals in our church, so we can make 100 copies. No. We have a license, and the license is based on our average weekly attendance, and we aren't restricted with how we can use the license permissions for reprint or online worship, provided that our category accurately reflects our average weekly attendance. There's no limit on the number of reprints. So in Zoom, right, you can have as many people on the call, and you can show, the reprints, show the images of the music in your Zoom call, or however you manage that. And as long as your license category reflects your annual average weekly attendance, it doesn't matter what's happening, number wise on your Zoom call. Mm-hmm. How's that sound? Okay, good. All right, so that's kind of how copyright works. There's a copyright claim. It tells you who owns the work, who controls the work. And it's found at the bottom of the hymnal page, usually, sometimes indexed in the back, or found at the bottom of the musical score. And then churches enjoy that special exemption for performance rights, but are not exempt from other rights. Yeah. So that's where one license comes in. I'm sure many people on this call remember the days, I certainly do, before one license, when CCLI was a way to license a number of publishers, multiple copyrights. But I remember writing letters. Putting a stamp on them and sending off, I'd like to make, a copy of this for my congregation. And they would send me a bill for, I don't know, $10 or, $15 for annual, or so. I don't remember what it was, but it was quite cumbersome. So between one license and CCLI, there you get access to a lot of music, but no license agency, not even CCLI and one license combined, are going to give you access to absolutely everything. And again, that's because copyright is rooted in property law. So the copyright holder decides whether or not they want to license through One License and or CCLI, or they just want to manage their permissions by themselves. So what you find at One License is what our member publishers have decided to upload. And the member publishers that you fund at One License are the member publishers who have asked us to manage their permissions for them. And just a word about that. So we perform this service for our member publishers, being this intermediary or whatever, this connection between composers and other artists and the church musician, but always the copyright holder always remains in control of their copyrighted work. So if you're looking for something from One License and you're not finding it, you are always welcome to reach out to the member publisher for any reason at any time. You don't have to go through us. They aren't closing their door and saying, please go talk to One License. That's not what that is. No. So One License offers two most popular licenses. We have a third one that's fairly popular, but not nearly as popular as the reprint and the podcast streaming. So as I said, reprint is making an image of the music, words alone or words plus music, in a new way. So you purchase the hymnal and you can open the hymnal and sing from it, but that doesn't give you permission to make additional copies of any of the hymns in that. So however you do that, I make a paper worship aid, I put it in the bulletin, I project it on a screen, all of that is reprint. And then online worship, our podcast streaming permissions are a collection of permissions. You need a number of permissions to post your worship service video using copyrighted music to the internet. And so this is a collection of permissions that allow churches and other organizations to do that. And then so that's our primary licenses, reprint and podcast streaming. And we also have a practice track license. It's for making rehearsal tracks for your musicians or your ministers or whoever. It's for rehearsal purposes only. You can't play a performance track during a worship service, but you can either make your own tracks or you can, in some instances, you can make copies of the work for your choir, for instance, to listen to and become familiar with if you wanted to do that. As I say, reprint and podcast streaming are our most popular, and often they're bundled together. And when you have both licenses, you get a rather sharp discount to have both of them together.
So I have
yes.
I have a question.
Please.
So for example, I've seen a couple of similar questions here in the chat.
Good.
One of them is, all right, so they send an email out to their members who are going to be joining live stream and so forth. And in that, they might have a link or a PDF of a hymn that's been used in the bulletin.
Mm-hmm.
Is that considered a reprint? Do you need copyright permission in order to put that in there?
You do. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. If you're not just singing it straight out of the physical purchased hymnal, then yes, you need reprint permission for that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what happens, I know when I've gone to on One License and I'm looking for a specific piece and I put it in there and a whole myriad of different composers and different pieces. How can I tell which one I need to select in order to put it in and say I have permission to use this?
My favorite question in all the world. Absolutely. Love that question. Jim, are you able to give me screen sharing permissions? I'd be happy to walk you guys through a couple of examples.
Okay, Ed is our technician on this
Oh.
one, so he should be able to do that.
Good. Okay. So let me say a couple more things, and then I'm gonna, if we can get this screen sharing to work, and I mean, if I can sort it out, then, oh, good. Okay, I can share my screen. So the, yes, okay. So let me do this, and then screen share. Share screen. Then share screen. Okay. Y'all are seeing my screen, and we're on the One License site, right?
Looks
Yes.
great.
Good. Okay. So I go to my account report usage. It's the same thing if I go to search music. I like report usage. And then I can search by title, or I can search by hymnal and number. Let's talk about searching by title first. So what organizes our search logic on our website is the same logic that runs Google. And we have come to the end of what I understand about that. But what I'm saying is, if you can make a Google search, you can search our website. Okay. And our website, our database is so much smaller than the whole internet. So that's good, right? But have you ever made a Google search and you're like, well, that is not what I was looking for at all. So you rethink your search, you're like, oh, okay, that's more like it, and the first, 3 or 6 things are ads, never ads on One License. But then you go down and you're like, and maybe the next 4 things are sort of related to what you were looking for. And then it sort of, moves into chaos and entropy and garbage, right? So on One License, the best way to search, so you make that initial search, and then you sort of put a little spin on it, and now you find what you're looking for. At One License, that optimal search is title and contributor's last name together in the title field. So not just the title, imagine how, especially because so many texts are based on scripture, right? So there's so many texts that have the same name, right? So you're going to search for the title and the contributor's last name, composer or text author. Usually, I looked at a couple of examples. Oops, that is not my script at all. I looked at a couple of examples. If I were to search, is this a common hymn? Eternal Christ You Rule by Dan Damon. It looks like a good one. So I would, oh, look, I already searched it. So I would search, I could enter the whole title, but, Eternal Christ Damon. And that popped up because my browser remembered that I made that search earlier. So that's not a One License thing, that's the browser. And then I search, and the very first thing that comes up is a did I move too fast there? So that's what I searched. And then what came up was Dan Damon. And it's in this case, because he wrote the text and the tune, we get both of his in one record, right? And they're both by Hope Publishing. So I could just, and this a little bigger. This is usually over here. These 4 icons tells you that it's approved for reprint and podcast streaming. So I could use it for either or both as needed. And it's also approved for those practice tracks that I was talking about, self-made tracks or a commercial record, to make a copy of the commercial recording for rehearsal purposes, right? And when I search the database, I'm looking for a match for just 3. There's so much information here, right? I'm looking for a match for just 3 things. This title, right? And his name, he's the contributor. There he is, Dan Damon. And there he is again, right? And then the copyright holder. So in the New Century Hymnal, it shows that the copyright on this is Hope Publishing for both text and tune. So I've got a match for title, contributors, and copyright holder, right? There's other information here. Type words and music, first line, language English, resource files, right? These are downloadable files uploaded by Hope, I imagine. Preview file. And this preview file is often, it's not in this one, but the preview file is often blurry intentionally, but in this one, it's quite clear. And you're like, yep, that's the one I want, right? But if there isn't a preview file, you're not worried about that because you already know that it's a match for title, contributors, and copyright holder. Does that make sense? Is that good? And
Yes.
then just as long as we're here, let's talk about reporting. So then I want to report this title. And it pops up and I can confirm for the week that I used it, how many reprint services there were, do I have 6 services at my church on the weekend to whatever, how many times it was podcast, right? Usually that's 1. The default on that is 1. And then I can submit and view the report that I made, sort of like, add it to your cart and then look at your cart. You're not buying anything, but that, like that online shopping. Or I could make this report this one title and then continue searching to report other titles. Okay. Is that helpful?
Yes. We had a question that just came up now. You mentioned
Good.
that you were looking for a match of the 3 criteria. Does that mean
Yes.
you must have the hymnal it belongs to? Can you
No.
find a song that you don't have access to in physical original license form, and if you have the music for that?
Correct. So you can make a congregational reprint of anything that you find in the database that's approved for reprint, whether or not you have that resource in your pews, on your shelf, whatever. Now, you can only reprint the congregational part. So you're going to need to find a score for your accompanist and your choir, right? Very often you've got a number of hymnals, right, on your bookshelf. And then you can make whatever arrangements you need to make for your choir that would be outside of your 1 license reprint permissions. But as long as it's approved for reprint for your license, as long as it's approved for reprint by the copyright holder, you can make copies for your congregation.
So, okay, that's a good point too. So we use it for a particular Sunday, and in a couple of weeks or months, we're going to use it again. We need to report both of those as separate instances.
Well, so in practical terms, probably yes, because it's several months away. But you can pre-report it, I suppose, if you want. The question we get sometimes is, we're going to use this hymn every Sunday during Advent. Do we need to report it on each of the 4 Sundays? You can report 4 times the usage on any one of the Sundays instead of, however. I have 1 service every weekend. We're doing this for all of Advent. I have 4 uses to report. Do I have to report 1 on each Sunday of Advent? No, you can report it 4 times. That's what we need.
Okay.
Yeah, the date that you used it is for us the least important part. And the fact that you're reporting it at all is the most important part. And then everything in between.
Is a pre-recorded YouTube video service posted to YouTube the same as podcast and streaming?
Correct. Pre-recorded, live streamed, archived are all covered by your podcast streaming permissions.
Okay. What if you attempt to find a hymn in your database and it's not listed? Where do you go from that point?
Yep, that's what we're for. We have a small team. We're 6. We are small but mighty, and we want to help you with that. So remember that you want to make a search by title and contributor. And let's back up 1 step. Before you actually search the database, take a look at that copyright claim and make sure that the piece is copyrighted by a 1 license member publisher. Because logically, if that copyright holder is not a 1 license member publisher, they haven't asked us to help them administer their permissions, right? So we have no way of telling you anything about their copyright permissions. That would be wrong if we did. So as long as the copyright holder is a member publisher, then you search the database. So step 1, who's the copyright holder? And then step 2, search the database. And the best way to search is by title and contributor together in the title field. Now, that's not the only way to search. I recommend you start there. It's also good to, if it works for your hymnal, you can search by hymnal and number, but that is a subset of the database. So when member publishers upload their data to the database, they can be done. They've uploaded their data, and it's all found in those database records that you see as you scroll through, right? And then they have the option of indexing their hymnal on our website, and then you can search it by hymnal resource and hymn page number. And then they have the option of indexing only their own copyrights. that's sort of the baseline of indexing your hymnal, is to index your copyrights that are in your hymnal. And then if they wanted to go an extra mile, they could index other hymns in their hymnal that are copyrighted by member publishers. They could connect to the other member publishers' records. And I don't want to make it sound like that's completely onerous, but it is an extra step. And so not every member publisher does that. So as you're searching the database, you're like, well, I know that this hymn is covered by my one license. I know this hymn is copyrighted by a one license member publisher, but when I search for it by hymnal page, I don't find it. Well, then I would say search by title and contributor. Myself, when I'm not managing for a parish right now, but I did for 20 years or so, and I just always searched by title and contributor because I knew I was going to find it if it was in there, if I searched by title and contributor.
So what happens if you're looking for a hymn that is not part of your publishing library that you have? Where do you go from there?
Right. Yeah. So if the copyright holder is not a one license member publisher, then you want to reach out to them directly for permission. Some people license through CCLI. So if you have a CCLI license, you might try that. I wouldn't say go buy a CCLI license. You can search, just like you can search one license. I think you can search one license and you can search CCLI before you purchase a license. But that's what I was doing when I was in the music director role. Eventually you start to see who licenses where, right? So I start with one, I don't find it there. I try the other, I don't find it there. And then I reach out either to customer service at either of those licensing agencies, or I reached out to the copyright holder directly. Not everybody licenses through a licensing agency, right? So, and you're like, gosh, I don't have any contact information. Thank God for Google, right? So
Yeah.
you can often find it that way.
So we had one question in particular about a hymn that seems to be the copyright owner is a self-publisher. The name happens to be Al Carmines, who has died at this point. And so now it's, where do we go now?
That is a good question. You might try one of the. I'm just guessing. Yeah, let's just throw some things out there. You might try one of the performing rights organizations, CSAC, BMI, who am I for ASCAP. You might try one of those and see if they know who's handling the estate for that person. Self-published. So if they're not self-published, if they publish with a publishing agency of some sort, often they have information. Gosh, Google. Who else? You might, like, if they're associated with a university or some sort of scholarly organization, you might try that. If somebody told me the story the other day of they reached out to somebody who was a friend of a friend, and that person had direct contact to the composer. And so they exchanged emails, and there was a phone call right before somebody was getting on a cruise ship. It was all very exciting, So, there's, I don't know if this is reminding me, sometimes copyrights will change hands. So I have a score in my library from 1976, or for heaven's sakes, from 1938, right? And so at one time it was, copyrighted by such and such company, but when I reach out to them, gosh, they don't even exist anymore. So then I Google who bought, such and such company, or yeah, sometimes copyrights can change hands. That's often something that we can help you with at One License. The self-published composer who has since died might be a little beyond our reach. We could sort of offer you the scattershot suggestions that I just offer you now. We're always happy to take. We love the weird questions, so feel free to email or call us. If a copyright has changed hands and all you have is your published score, sometimes Google can help you with that. Sometimes reaching out to the original copyright holder, or Googling who purchased, the original copyright holder now that company has closed its doors. I think I missed a question, Jim. You asked what to do you're searching the database for a member publisher's title and you don't find it. So I'm sorry,
Right.
I forgot to answer that one for you. So you do a good search on the website, you don't find it, feel free to contact us. We're happy to help you. You can also make a manual submission through the form on our website, or you can reach out to the member publisher, the copyright holder directly, and you can find copyright information on our website. Contact information on our website. Sorry, Jim, you were going to say something else.
Yes. Here's a little bit different situation. We've had several people have mentioned something like this similarly in the comments here. You want to use a more popular song in the form of worship. Here's an example. There's a parable about the prodigal son, and you want to use the song "Bring Him Home" from Les Mis.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do, or where do you go for something like getting permission to use that for like a live stream or part of your service?
Good. Yeah, that's an important part of it, right? So if you're not live streaming it and you're not trying to reprint it for the congregation, if it's just for your in-person worship and you're just performing it, performing, it's prayer, but yes,
Yes.
then you don't need any permissions at all. But as soon as you upload that video to the internet, then you need the copyright holder's permission. So you can Google who holds the copyright to Bring Them Home, I suppose. Yeah. And I mean, anything's possible. I find our database is huge. I find weird things in there all the time. I don't know that that's in there, but you sure could look. But I wouldn't search the one license database until I knew who the copyright holder was. If you skip step one, who holds the copyright, and jump to step two, is it in the database? You'll probably find something, and it's only going to be confusing. And it doesn't mean that you have permission. You just found something, right? So if it's the copyright holder is not a one licensed member publisher, don't search the database. But if you're trying to figure out who holds that copyright, that's the sort of question you can send to us here at One License. We're always happy to do what we can. I think before you ask One License, maybe do a Google search, because that's what we're going to do. we don't know what that is either. So yeah. But you aren't prohibited from using that in worship. Yeah.
So, for example, I've used Worshipcast from Christian Copyright Solutions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For our church for something similar to something like that, where you can load up what you're using, and they pursue the royalties
Excellent.
from a performance perspective. It doesn't give you permission to make copies of it or something like that, but from a live streaming perspective, that has it like theirs.
Yeah.
Now, some people have talked about the cost for something like this. How is the cost determined, and what can they do? We have many people who are in small churches with fewer members that show up. What is possible for something like that?
Mm-hmm. So we keep our license fees awfully low for that exact reason, right? So I'm not saying it's free. I'm not saying that $100, $200 is not real money. It is, but let me share again here. Let's see. Nope. Sorry, I'm not doing that right. Okay, try again. There. Oh. Musician, not a tech wizard. Okay. You can see my screen, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the prices are here on our to the right of our logo. You can see options and prices. Yeah. And the prices are based on average weekly attendance. So that's not registered members, and that's not households or tithing households or whatever. It's your head count per Sunday, averaged over the year, right? Your average weekly attendance. So for a very small congregation, the cost for the reprint license or the podcast streaming license, either one is $120 per year. And then if you want both, you pay full price for the first, and then you get the second at about 40% of the price. So if you want the bundle license and you're in this small congregation, that's $190. And the license fees then go into a pot, and then license holder reports are used to calculate how those license fees are distributed as royalties, right? So if you're in a larger congregation, you pay more. Presumably, a larger congregation has more resources, and presumably, a smaller congregation has fewer resources. And then, something that happened in my church when I was in graduate school, it wasn't about licensing, it was about purchasing substantially priced scores for my choir, was that somebody in the congregation had approached the pastor. It was maybe my second year there, and said, I really like what's going on with the choir. I'd like to do something to support them. And I thought it'd be nice, if they sent me on a little trip, but they didn't. But the pastor and I talked about it, and I said, I think it would be great if we could buy these 3 pieces of music and it would be this much money. He goes, that sounds about right, what they're talking about. So it wouldn't be the same thing. It would be very similar if somebody was looking to do something for the life of the church, to the tune of $190 for a small congregation to have reprint and podcast streaming to make worship just a little more gracious and outreach and possible, then that might be the sort of thing.
Jane, I see your hand up. Do you have another question?
I'm still back on the performing popular pieces and so on.
Okay.
I was for many years the music director at a very well-known local UCC historic church. We had a lot of special services, and we would get in requests for appropriate pieces. One year we wanted to do a reduction of Godspell, and a neighboring church did it at 3:00 in the afternoon, and they got more than a wrist slap. And at that point, I found out, because we got a call, because we had already listed in the newspaper we're going to be doing highlights of Godspell. So I got a call from ASCAP. What are you doing? I found out if you do this stuff at the end of the service and you give people the option to not stay, it was perfectly, and I've checked it several times since, and we've done a lot. So after the last hymn, the pastor would announce, we will be doing, and it's legal because it's in the worship service. It was 9 minutes. It was under the 15-minute limit. It was published 30 years ago. We used the whole thing, including we had members who played instruments. And we've done it. We had done it ever since. We did it for 6 or 7 years till I left. So anybody know any different, tell me, but it worked out for us if you do it at the end of the service. And I guess the caveat, what I was told from several sources, such as ASCAP, as long as you give people the option to walk out, they're choosing to stay for the extended portion of the worship service, was the way it was phrased. I wanted to share that because, it really runs into this license. I still reported it, by the way. Yeah. It's somewhere in there on one license every time we did this. So I still reported it because I worry that maybe I'm not getting correct information.
So you're asking me? I don't know much about performance rights. That's outside the scope of one license, but I can tell you that churches don't need permission to use copyrighted music during a worship service.
I also believe that if you were to do like an introduction or something like that, you do also need to register that with the appropriate licensing agency. It's different for performances of
it absolutely
production,
is,
as opposed
absolutely.
to actual worship services.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. I see a question in the chat, a comment. Ellie says, you need to have legitimate copies. The church doesn't give you permission to make Xerox copies. Ellie, that's exactly right. So you can, under your licensing permissions, make congregational reprints of things that you find in the database, but you cannot make copies for your musicians, for the
We had
choir.
originals. Thank you. I need to know that because we had
No,
originals.
I'm sorry, Jane, that wasn't directed at you, Jane. Sorry,
I'm
that was
sorry.
just a comment. No, that's okay. That was just a comment from Ellie that the reprint license is for congregational reprint. You can't make Xerox of choral scores or organ scores or whatever. You're right, Ellie. That's true. So a concert in church, Lynn is saying a concert in church. So if your event includes substantial worship elements and is non-commercial, you're not selling tickets for admission. A free will offering is okay, but non-commercial means you're not selling admission tickets. There's no admission price. And the event contains substantial worship elements that can be covered by your one license permissions. You're not limited to Sunday morning, again, a Tuesday afternoon staff meeting, you can use your license permissions for that. A Friday night concert, or whenever the concert is, as long as the concert has substantial worship elements, so it's a worship event, and as long as it's non-commercial, you don't charge a price for it. So worship elements, so the pastor at the beginning welcomes everyone and opens us in prayer, and then between a couple of the songs, there are some scripture readings, and at the end, the pastor offers a benediction. That is absolutely substantial worship elements. And I'm trying to remember a choir concert that I did that didn't include some of that, right? So, as long as the concert is non-commercial, it can be covered by your license permissions, insofar as the music you're using is in the database approved for that use. Yeah.
So what about a lot of this assumes that you're going to be doing this before you actually do it. Is there ability to go back and report on things that you've already used and you want to still make sure that you're correct on that?
Correct. Yes. So ideally, especially in this era of live streaming, ideally, you're making sure before you post your video online, before you live stream, Sunday morning service, you're making sure that you have permission for everything that you're using, either under your one license permissions or however else you need to obtain them. But it's Tuesday, and gosh, I thought I had permission for everything for this Sunday, but I'm just looking at this one, and looks like I didn't research this. What should I do? Well, you have a couple of days, and you might get an answer from the copyright holder, or if it's one license, you might be able to find there or get us to help you find it. But now it's Friday and you still don't have your answer. So you have a couple of options. We don't recommend that you include unlicensed music in your online video, nor do we recommend that you make copies for your congregation that you don't have permission to copy, right? So for the video, you have the option, if it's a prelude, you can play the prelude and then start the video. If it's a postlude, you can stop the video and then play your postlude. You don't need permission for that in-person experience. It's only for posting it online. If it's in the middle of the service, you can mute. You don't need to turn off the camera, but you can mute the sound so that you're not sharing what you don't have permission to share online, right? But if now it's Tuesday and you realize that last Sunday there was something you thought you had permission for, you're trying to report it now, and you're like, oh, actually, this one, isn't covered by one license. It's the wrong, copyright holder. It's not what I thought it was, or whatever. Then I would say reach out to the copyright holder. It has long been my experience, and I don't see that is changing. It has long been my experience that people want you to use their music and they just want you to compensate them, right? So if you reach out, maybe they write you a license, or maybe they say that's fine, but if you use it again, we'll write a license, or that's fine. How about this much, and you can use it in perpetuity, or I'm sorry, you don't have permission. At that point, you want to either edit the video, to mute that part or take that video down if you find out that you can't get permission for it. Yeah. Is that helpful?
Yes, yes.
Great.
Let's see if there's anything else. There's a lot of questions. I'm hoping we tried to get to the majority of them that were showing up. So that, but in case we haven't, if you still haven't had your question answered and you'd like to raise it up again, please let us know. Let's see. So where can we go to find more information about how copyrights work? So we're trying to do the things that we can. We're trying to be as compliant as possible. We have our one license. Where are some other educational things that we can get to understand more about copyright and how how is it part of the church and how it affects the church?
Yeah, let me put a link. We have a blog. Let me put a link there. So it's onelicense.net is our website, but if you put the word news, N-E-W-S, news.onelicense.net, if you put news in front of our website, that takes you to our blog. Our blog is always educational. It's never marketing. We have a newsletter every month. If you'd like to send us an email, let me give you our email address. We'd be happy to add you to that. Our license holders are automatically added to it. They can unsubscribe themselves or resubscribe. If you don't have a license, we're still happy to send you our newsletter every month. You don't need a license to contact us with any copyright questions. As I said at the beginning, there's just so much to think about with copyright, and we're always ready to think through those issues with you. We don't always have the answer. Often we do, but when we don't, we try at least to point you in the right direction. I can think of about 3 times since I started working at One License where we just didn't have any answer. Usually, at the very least, we're like, well, we found this on Google. See if this gets you anywhere. I mean, sometimes it's so far outside of our sphere that that's the best we can do. But we're happy to, give you a cup of water and send you on your way at a minimum. No?
Yeah. What about unrecorded streaming? Is that subject to the streaming recording requirements?
So if you post it on the internet, if it's an internet platform at all, then you need permission. So that includes Zoom and Google Hangouts. That includes live streams that are not archived. That includes pre-recorded things. That includes, I don't know that people are doing so much pre-recordings like we were, early when we were trying to get our systems up and running, but certainly anything pre-recorded can be covered by podcast streaming. Right. And if it's copyrighted, you need the copyright holder's permission. And if it's not copyrighted, you can do anything what you want with it. So we haven't really talked about public domain, but generally speaking, works pass into the public domain 70 or 75 years after the death of the creator. Recently, for some things, that was extended to 95 years. But copyrights can be renewed. So you just want to make sure. The question is this under copyright? The question is not, is this in the public domain? And I say that because is this under copyright is a question that you can answer yes or no. And if you get a yes answer, then you really know. Yeah. If you get a no answer, I mean, you can't really prove a negative, right? I mean, well, I guess, yeah, I don't know what the philosophical on that is, but anyway, it's easier to prove a yes than to prove a no. So, and the question is this under copyright, yes or no? So if you don't see a copyright claim on it, if the creators have been deceased for more than 75 years, if the copyright has not been renewed, thank goodness for Google, you can search is such and such by so and so under copyright, get some that way.
We had something that, so there are some items in your database that show up that can be, you do have a pod license for it, and others you don't have a podcast license. What do we do in those cases?
So you're saying you have podcast streaming permissions under your license, but when you search for this title in the database, it's not approved for podcast streaming. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes.
Yeah. So in that case, so the copyright holder, the member publisher, is in charge of uploading their data. They're always in control of their data. So in that case, I would say send them an email or make a phone call and ask them about that. It could be they're like, oh, sorry, that's an error in our data, or we've changed our minds about that, and we do want that to be approved for podcast streaming. Or, for some reason that only they would know, they can't give you that permission. But I think it's worth asking.
Okay. We had another question about gender references in copyright musical work, and that a soloist might make changes to it on the fly.
Yeah.
What's some of the rules about something like that?
Yeah. So the rule is you can't alter a copyrighted work without the copyright holder's permission. So, there have been times, not necessarily this question, but there have been times when I wanted to, publish a refrain for my assembly that's in Spanish. And I said, could I do the first half in English and the second half in Spanish? Or, maybe it was all in English and I wanted to offer half of it in Spanish. And I wrote an email to the publisher, and they said, sure, that's fine. Or they said, oh, we have that, and here's what we'd like you to use for that. And it was different than what I was going to do. So fine. So that's the copyrighted work. You need the copyright holder's permission. So for that video, if what we're talking about was a video and you have it posted to the internet, I would ask the copyright holder about that. They may say that's fine, or they may say we don't want our work altered. So if you have their permission, you can leave the video posted. And if you aren't able to get their permission, then I would say either mute that song, edit the video and mute that song, or take that video down, because you want what you have posted, you want it to be licensed, right?
Yeah. So another thought came up about jazz musicians, and those are, even if they're doing improvisation on pieces that are in the public domain, for example. Uh, my understanding is that they own the copyright to their performance. So if it's included in your service, that's more or less they're giving permission to use their material as part of your service.
Yeah. So if you're at all, we're moving outside the realm of my expertise. If you're feeling at all hinky about that, maybe ask a copyright attorney. But I would say just make sure you have that musician's permission to include them in your live stream. Presumably you do, but it's always good to ask the question. And then if you want more specific about that, I would, maybe there's somebody in your congregation who's a copyright attorney, and they could advise you a little better on that. Or you could contact your denomination and see if one of the denomination attorneys there at the, synod office or whatever could speak to that.
Okay, we're about at an hour into this at this point, and I'm just taking, it seems as though the questions have been getting a little bit, they're not as coming in as rapid fire as they used to. I noticed a comment that one person, I think her name was Ellie, had mentioned would be something good, is that there is obviously a lot of interest in this subject, and it might be good to have another one of these type of sessions again in the future. But one of the things I think would be a good idea is that if people could submit questions beforehand, because this way here, it'll give us a better chance to try and track through everything and make sure we cover everything. There might be a number of questions that are similar in nature, so we could combine those and make it a little bit more efficient. So that's something I'm going to take as a takeaway from this, and see what we might be able to do for another time in the future. Before we wrap it up, is there anything else that you think you'd like to share and make sure that we get as a final summary for what's going on?
These were really good questions. Y'all asked the good ones. If you are all interested in this, we have about 6 times a year, we do a call and response webinar, not unlike this format. It's kind of an office hours thing. So you can bring your questions. You don't need to be a license holder to join. Jim, I'll share with you. I just looked for it real quick while you were saying that. I'll share with you, and then you can share it with anybody else, the link to register for that. It'll be Tuesday, October 17th. Tuesday, October
Hello.
17th, and it's 2 o'clock Central, so 3 o'clock Eastern. If that's of interest. There's another one in November, and then, the holidays intervene there, and we'll pick up again in the late winter, spring.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your participation for today. You've had some great questions, and we got through a majority of them, but I'm sure we didn't get to everyone's, and I apologize for that. But stay tuned. We'll be having some more of this in the future. And thank you, Siobhan, for your time and your expertise on this. It's been a great format, and we very much appreciate it. And I also like to thank Ed Clark, who has been acting as our tech support on this link and capturing everything together. And watch our website and newsletters for announcements of future sessions. We'll have another one in late October. I'm still putting together the plans for that one, but watch for that one, and it'll be on a different topic, and we hope to see you there in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you again in the future. Bye now.